let's do this. So before we start and introduce to the listeners, before I start and introduce my guest, I just want to pay tribute to Charles Allen's uncle, who passed away very recently because of the coronavirus. Charles, do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I guess this is just an example of how this coronavirus situation will eventually probably come home to a lot of us, if not directly, maybe indirectly, through us all knowing somebody who's sadly died or knowing somebody who knows somebody who has sadly died. It really does seem to be gathering some pace now. And yeah, my uncle last Friday was enjoying lunch in Cambridge, and this Friday he's dead. So he went from falling ill on Sunday and being dead on Thursday morning. So it's very sad. An old guy, of course, 85 years old, but otherwise fairly healthy. So yeah, I think it's just, if we need it, yet another message to us all that we have to stay home, protect the NHS, and save lives.
Yeah. And he was related to dad's side, mom's side?
Yeah, he's my dad's brother. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, our thoughts are with you and your family, and a lot of condolences, Charles.
Thank you very much.
So I just wanted to really set the scene, to be honest with you, all the listeners, in terms of how we know each other. So from that perspective, we met when we were 13 at school.
Yeah, amazing.
So I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah, so Azher and myself were thrown together in the same house at St Edward's School. It was a house called Tilly's House. We were shell formers, as they called the first year students there. We bonded pretty immediately, and sort of we rode all the various highs and lows of 5 years at St Edward's School, and the school growing and expanding, and us deciding to be pioneers at that very young age, to go and help establish the new boarding house. And then I guess, like many of these friendships at public school, we all split up like a hand grenade. I went off to university in Leeds. I don't think anybody from St Edward's went there that year, or has probably been there since. Yeah. And then I studied Spanish at Leeds University, and then really set to building my career overseas using my Spanish. And I was very fortunate as part of my career to spend almost 16 years living and working overseas, 10 of which were in Latin America. So I guess necessarily I sort of lost touch with a lot of people I knew from my previous life. And then through the miracles of social media and LinkedIn, Azher managed to reconnect with me, and we met up recently in London. And yeah, it's incredible that after 36 years of not having seen each other, we picked up almost where we left off, and just gave each other a fairly lengthy update of the highs and lows of each of our lives. And here we are today doing this this conversation.
Yeah, just for reference sake, 4 out of the 5 years we spent together at school. So that was at that age, formative years together, at varying degrees, sharing a room. At the end, the last year, we actually were in a dorm together, just the two of us, and really fun memories. I remember, really good.
And at that age, it's a big percentage of your total life experience. Yeah, less so now, but when you're in your late teens, that's a good sort of 25% of your whole life's experience. So yeah,
absolutely. And I just wanted to pay tribute to Charlie's parents. When my parents were 3,000 miles away in another country, so when we used to have leave weekends and we used to go away, Charles used to invite me over to his house, and his mum especially, very hospitable, always looking after me. So I just really want to pay tribute to both of your parents on that one.
And they remember you. They remember you fondly. So
yeah, that's very kind, very kind. So got married, had 2 sons. was it Harry and George? Is it
Harry and George? Yeah,
Harry and George. Yes.
Yeah, I was really sort of living the dream, I suppose. You know, I set myself this sort of personal ambition of using my Spanish to live and work overseas. I naively thought that perhaps a business would hire me just because of that, and I very quickly realized that they wouldn't. So I did it the hard way. I joined what was then Coca-Cola and Schweppes, which is the bottling franchise of Coca-Cola and Schweppes, obviously.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I still don't really understand why, but I was posted up to Edinburgh as a salesman, working in the on-trade and bingo halls and contract caterers. And so this rather home counties young man was going into these sort of east of Edinburgh pubs, trying to sell soft drinks to pubs which really only served sort of beer and malt beer. So it was a real baptism of fire, but I sort of earned my spurs there and then went down to head office and worked on national accounts, and I was there for about 3 years. And then suddenly this itch around using my Spanish needed another scratch, and so I made inquiries within the Coca-Cola system, but I was far too junior to be worthy of an overseas assignment at that stage. But I was impatient, and then fortunately Guinness at that period were about to expand their spirits division overseas, and they were looking for people who were 100% mobile, could speak Spanish, and had some level of distributor experience. And my last role at Coca-Cola had been managing a bunch of on-trade distributors across the UK. So I jumped at it. They asked me interview, do you have any questions for us? And I said, yeah, of course. When will I live and work overseas? And they said, oh, that's ridiculous. This was going to take a long time. And I thought, okay. But anyway, 6 months later, I was living in Miami. 6 months after that, I was living in Argentina, looking after Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador. And curiously, my dad had been born in Argentina. So that was sort of closing a nice sort of personal family circle. Then I was charged with sort of finding sort of joint venture or buyout opportunities in my markets. And our Peruvian distributor, Johnny Walker, said, you know, I can see the writings on the wall. Let's do a deal. So I called in the cavalry from London to help out because I was, 27, 28. I had no idea what M&A was all about. And again, equally bizarrely, the owner of this distributor just realized that in a cost-sharing joint venture, having a 49% stake or a 0% stake gave him about as much control. So he said, look, just buy the whole lot off me. So we did. And then the company had a bit of a problem because who was mad enough to go and want to live in Peru in 1995, just after the Shining Path had been shut down and the whole market was pretty insecure? Well, they found a guy who was mad enough to do that, and that was me. I certainly wasn't, first choice. I acknowledge that, but I was prepared to do it. And that, if you like, was my first sort of career break of getting that general management experience at such a young age was priceless. And the market just took off, and it's the kind of market within the sort of now Diageo network where you're just a sort of an element of rounding in the numbers. So it doesn't matter if you screw up. So we sort of experimented with all sorts of things as we sort of felt our way to success there in Peru. I got married while I was there to a British girl who I'd met. Harry, my firstborn, was born. Then moved down to Chile, did an integration job there between the Grand Met business and the Guinness business. And then, again, in terms of a sort of fortuitous conversation, I was talking to a guy I respected within the organization, and I said, look, what's going to be next? And he said, well, yeah, you're trundling along nicely in these markets, which basically mean nothing in terms of the scale. And if you want to sort of up your game within this organization, you're going to have to go back into the line because your career is a bit sort of backwards at the moment. You've been a general manager, but you've done no serious line role.
Yeah.
So I took that on board, and then again, fortuitously, an opening came about in Mexico. So I went up to Mexico as marketing director of what is a scale business in Mexico. Had a great experience there. Again, it's a country that I'd lived in as a kid, so sort of closing a sort of personal loop on that. And then 3 years into the Mexican piece, I'd been in Latin America for 10 years at this stage. Our kids were 6 and 7, and we'd always committed to the boys being educated back in the UK. Even though I, as you've heard, went to private school as a boarder and enjoyed it, we felt we wanted to be around for our kids' experience of the same thing. Yeah. So we decided we couldn't make the move straight from Mexico back to the UK. So we did a bit of a soft landing in Holland. Diageo runs all of its major whiskey brands out of the Netherlands. So I went to the Netherlands as a marketing director for Johnny Walker Black Label, which was the most incredible experience. Some really good experiences working this time mainly in Asia, but also back in Latin America. Then when it really was crucial for the boys to be back in the UK, managed to secure a move back to the UK with Diageo looking after the super premium classic malts range. And that was when I really, after a couple of years doing that, I just thought, you know what, there's got to be more to life than blogging whiskey around the world. You know, I wonder what else is out there. And the UK market for spirits is a big market, but it's got very little value in it. Most of the products you see on the supermarket shelf are pretty low value. So I thought, right, as the redundancy wheel turned once again in Diageo, I stepped out. I thought, you know, I wonder if sport needs some marketing talent from blue chip organizations. And I'd had an experience with sport at Diageo running the McLaren F1 relationship with Johnny Walker Black Label. And I knocked on loads of doors and I met some really interesting people, but every time I just thought, no, they're not taking this marketing game seriously enough, but they need to. Yeah. And then one day I was called up by a headhunter and he said, look, Charles, I know you've looked at sport and I know you've looked at football, but Arsenal need a marketing director. And I said, oh, really? Have I got to go and speak to another football club? He said, trust me, these guys are different. And he was right. I went to see the CEO who'd only been in about 8 months, and he said, look, I am recruiting into each of these sort of departmental verticals, experts in their field. He said, I've got enough football people telling me how to do things. I now need a proper marketing director, a proper retail director, a proper HR director. And that's what he did. And so we spoke the language of brands for the first time within a football club. And 10 years ago when this was, it was pretty pioneering for a football club to be thinking and operating like that. Now it's fairly normal, and Man City and Chelsea and Man United, they've all caught up. Yeah. And in some respects moved on. But it was new in those days, and it was all great. And we're back in the UK. The boys are great, enjoying school. And just when I began to start thinking again, I wonder if there's anything else beyond the sport, that's when the dream ended in a way, and my marriage disintegrated.
And I want to come back to that, because I think the one thing I do want to say is that if and I've done a little bit of research actually on looking at your social media, and you look at your if you look at your career, I mean, there's a huge amount of success there, and there's a lot of progression and a lot of drive and a lot of ambition. But I just and Arsenal is a really good place to stop for a minute, because I wanted to read out to the listeners something that you wrote on your LinkedIn for the current role that you're thinking to go into. Right. And it's really interesting, because it says here, and I quote, for the first time in my career, I've given myself the luxury of time and thought to focus on designing the next stage of my career. My natural curiosity for the world and in humans has taken me all over the world in a variety of exciting commercial and marketing roles. I'm now increasingly interested in roles that offer the opportunity to combine my blue chip commercial marketing skills with not-for-profit purpose rather. Yeah. My trustee role, and you're a trustee, which we'll touch upon also. Yeah. Your trustee role have introduced me to the satisfaction that is derived from doing the right thing by people and simply helping people. Now, this is really interesting, because you look at the the roles you've taken on and the success you've had, and yet you read that something obviously major's happened for you to shift from this track to that track, and that's why I wanted just to bring that element into this conversation.
Yeah,
And yeah,
and it's interesting. I've always, as I've managed my career, I've really sort of planned it around some really simple guiding principles about the kind of organizations I want to work for. So the kind of organizations I want to work for are organizations whose brands I'm aware of and use. So that immediately rules out categories that I don't participate in, like smoking, or have very little interest in, like financial services. I always want to work with organizations whose value sets I can connect with at some level. So I'm always looking for purpose-driven organizations. And then the third one is always, I want to work in organizations where I can sort of learn and develop. And that's really been my sort of guiding principle the whole way through this. So as now I enter a new life stage, both my boys have pretty much fled the roost, although they still take deposits out of the bank of mum and dad. But yeah, they're a lot more independent. I'm fortunate enough to now be mortgage free. So I'm at a stage where I'm thinking again, is this it? And as much as I've loved working for all the companies I've worked for, and I've fortunately stayed within the sort of Premier League of organizations in their categories, at the end of the day, stuff like whiskey and even football, even though football is massively important to a lot of people, at the end of the day, it is only whiskey and it is only football. And actually, if I can find an organization who's willing to accept someone with my skills and capabilities, with whom I can really connect at a deep personal way, I think I finally will be doing something really important. And that's not to sort of trivialize the work I've done on some great brands around the world, which has all been an amazing experience. But I really now want to do something that I can actually leave a proper legacy and really help some people along the way, as I've been lucky enough to have been helped throughout my whole career and a lot more recently.
Yeah, and so I stopped you at the point where the dream, you said the dream ended. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Quite often life is what happens. Life is what passes you by while you're busy making plans. I think that was a sort of either a Woody Allen or John Lennon quote. I can't remember. But my whole sort of life and career had always been very planned. I sort of had a bit of a sort of 5-year plan, a rolling 5-year plan all the time. Interrupted at times with some lucky breaks, but often you work hard to make your lucky breaks as well. And then I think, if I'm brutally honest, I took my eye off the ball in terms of my relationship with my wife. I'd like to think she would say the same, but we ended up growing apart, and a few bad decisions along the way had us separate 3 years ago, and it wasn't what I wanted. I accept my cause within it, and as happens to a lot of people, I've now found out, I really took a big decline on my mental health. I became properly mentally ill, and I received a lot of help and a lot of support from all sorts of people from all different walks of life, obviously healthcare professionals and therapists, but also friends and colleagues and people who maybe I least expected help from. And a combination of all those factors led me to recovery. And my experience through that journey, which lasted about 18 months, so a good long period, and coming across some really young people who were not much older than my own children, or if I look back to when I was in my early 20s and just starting out, people at that age should not be experiencing what some of these kids that I met were experiencing. absolutely broke my heart. And I thought, hang on a minute. Okay, so these people are now in crisis, and the system is just picking them up, and they'll be processed, and they'll pop out the other side. And I genuinely hope they do. But hang on a minute. Why are they in crisis? What's happened further upstream to have these people arrive at the door of this hospital? And that's the area where I now want to have an impact and create some change. I want to be able to deploy my commercial and marketing skills either in the not-for-profit space, in something related to mental health, and a lot of charities have a link into mental health issues, or in the private sector of people who are working in mental health, or even in the startup area. And if you think about it, if you think about the industry that has sprung up around our physical health, there are gyms, there are diets, there are clothing ranges, there are vacations, there are podcasts, meditation podcasts, you name it. There's a multi-billion-pound industry around our physical health. Where's the equivalent around our mental health?
Yeah.
And actually, I think right now, the timing, again, perhaps for me is fortuitous, because I think when we come out of the back end of this coronavirus thing, watch out. There's going to be a mental health time bomb ticking there.
Agreed.
I think for the moment, whilst Boris has got us on this sort of war footing, I mean, this is his Churchill moment. This is his World War II. He's asking us all to get behind his purpose of staying indoors, protecting the NHS and saving lives. This week, he's going to put that message in our hands by a physical letter. From a marketing campaign point of view, it's classic what he's doing. It's first build the reach. Now he's going to build the engagement with a personal letter to 30 million households. So this is his moment where all of us can rally around a purpose. And I think that is what's going to keep a lid on the mental health issues for now. But let's project ourselves to September, October, when people are going back to school, people are going back to work, people are suddenly emerging back into the light, and the world will have changed. And how well people adapt to it is going to be critical. And I think we're going to see a lot of people beginning to show maladaptive behaviors, show signs of mental illness. And I hope that's where I can sort of step into the light and help a charity, help more people through maybe by raising more funds or by having better campaigns or whatever it might be. That's where I want to deploy my expertise now.
It's really interesting, and I just want to go back to your own experience, because obviously you were affected by the separation of your wife. That impacted on many areas of your life, and I want, if you don't mind, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because the listeners, there's a lot of stuff here that you're saying people can relate to, and it'll help them in terms of managing their own that expectation or acknowledgement of themselves. The run up to the divorce and the relationship, especially with your boys. Talk a little bit about that impact.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely everything changed for me. It's strange, and now as I'm on the other side of it, I don't refer to me as coming back. And people who don't know me so well say, "Oh, you're back to your old self," and I say, "No, I'm not back to myself. I'm new. I feel reborn." And I guess everyone's experience is different. My decline was very gradual. It's a bit like the story of the frog in boiling water. You start off in a cold pan of water, the heat gets turned on, and you feel it getting a bit warmer, and suddenly, bang, you're boiling, and it's all over. And as I reflect on it, there are some things that definitely sort of signposted me along the way in terms of sort of what happened to me. So small things like suddenly you find yourself losing your memory for things that normally you wouldn't think twice about, but you'd struggle to remember those things. You'd forget where you lost things. You'd then miss a deadline at work. Then you'd sort of skip shaving one morning. So all of these little habits and daily routines, they start going until you get to a point where there's really nothing left, and you can't even get out of bed. And getting out of bed and going to a supermarket is all you can manage in a day, and it's a huge effort. And you might get to the door of the supermarket and have a panic attack and have to go home, and you just can't wait to go to bed, and you dread getting up in the morning. That's what it's like in the worst expression of it. And just as it's a gradual descent, which in my case, whilst I was trying, I couldn't find a way to stop it. And it's only when I sort of touched bottom that I begin a gradual emergence. And you start disassociating with people. You know, what I really don't like about this whole coronavirus thing is the use, the prevalence of the word isolation. Isolation is a word, in my mind, so associated with mental health. And I see the government are now beginning to use the word shielding a little bit more, because I think they've listened to some of the mental health practitioners saying isolation is not a good word to use, because that's what happens when you're depressed. You isolate, and you isolate big time.
Yeah.
So all that was going on. So of course, my relationship with my work colleagues was suffering. My relationship with my boys was suffering. My boys are angry because, of course, although they're young men, they're still kids, and their sort of perfect, sort of idealized bubble of their lives was suddenly pricked, and they saw the realities and how human their parents actually were. And it all starts sort of wobbling a little bit. And yes, with my boys, it's particularly hard. But, you know, fortunately, with my youngest son, I'm now back onto a very good relationship. And with my eldest son, that will happen. I'm
sure it will.
And I have to say, you know, whilst you want to isolate and disassociate from everybody, what you have to do is take a step forward, reconnect with people. And one of the biggest things, and I know it sounds so hackneyed and it's so hard to do, is ask for help.
Yeah.
You know, and I speak to a lot of people now who are going through mental health problems with some of the work I do on a voluntary basis. And everyone says the same thing. It was only when I started asking for help did I start to feel a little bit better. And gradually you come out of it. And believe me, if I could put my finger on one thing that had me start climbing out of that hole, boy, I would bottle that, I'd market that, and I would be a multi-millionaire tomorrow. But the truth is, there isn't just one thing. It's a combination of a lot of things, and everyone has their own little formula that will actually
I guess it's different for everybody, isn't it?
And you know, I say this as well, that, you know, whilst I wouldn't wish this on anybody, and I'm not glad or grateful that I went through it. What I am massively pleased about and grateful about is that it has given me this absolute laser focus on what I want to do with the next stage of my life. And I'm so excited by that. And I'm having some incredible conversations with incredible people who, prior to this, I would never have had the right to go and see. So I've been in to see the CEO of Guide Dogs for the Blind, and obviously there's a massive correlation with mental ill health and midlife sight loss.
Yes.
I've had a great conversation with the CEO of Mind. I volunteer at a Mind charity shop. I've been in to see Dementia UK, and the list goes on. You know, something will happen for me. I'm just convinced of that.
I'm convinced. Absolutely convinced. I think the interesting part is, and I've experienced this because I remember when we met up, I shared with you the loss of my entire business and watching that slide away. You know, that's nearly 30 years of work, and that has an effect on you know, even that has an effect mentally on your ability and your own confidence. Absolutely. I think the interesting thing was the fact is that you mentioned something to me that really stuck with me was, you know, you've relinquished yourself from all the sort of the materialistic worldly things.
Yeah,
most of them anyway.
Me now.
Yeah, and you mentioned, which I can relate to, is that, you know, you're happier now in that sense without that stuff. And talk a little bit about that and how you're feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it is only stuff, you know, and believe me, just as my career was advancing and sort of progressing along a fast track path, so were the whistles and bells associated with that. You know, had a lovely house, couple of cars, you know, dog, 2 cats, lovely art on the walls, 2 foreign holidays a year, boys at private school. What's not to love about all of that? But actually, when all that goes, you realize that it was only stuff anyway, and stuff can either be replaced or you can make do without it. And I'm choosing to make do without it. So
good for you.
I rent a place in London. I don't own anything at the moment. I don't own a car anymore. I use Zip cars. I ride Boris bikes. I walk other people's dogs. I've got one with me here at the moment who's being very well behaved, given that it's nearly his supper time. And I'm really happy. And to think that if I had to, I could probably pack all of my worldly possessions within about 2 hours and be out of there. And
it's interesting.
When I relocated back to the UK, well, the years I lived overseas and worked all that time, I left the UK for Miami with a suitcase and I think 2 boxes of books. I arrived back to the UK with a 40-foot container jammed to the doors full of stuff, my wife, 2 kids, and all the rest of it. And I'm now somewhere, not right back to the Miami sort of state of being, but pretty much. You know?
It's interesting. Something that came to my mind just now is that sometimes you have to go through a door where it seems you've gone the wrong way and it seems very painful, but you come out the other side and you look back on your journey, or when you get to your destination and say, you know what, I had to go through there to get to where I am now. And it's
the way I articulate that, and I think one of the small triggers that really helped me is when I stopped asking myself the question, why me? Why is all this happening to me? It's unfair. Why on earth me? When I stopped asking those questions and started asking the question, what path has this experience now put me on? Suddenly, I started to feel better.
Yeah. And can I touch upon, and look, I completely understand if you don't want to talk about this. You know, I know that certain friends helped you, especially last year, helped you get to a particular place. Do you care to talk about that in terms of, you know, the help that you eventually got?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in periods like this, you really get to know who your friends are. And I talked about how I found and received help from unlikely sources and some sources that were probably anticipated. The one group of friends of mine, a couple, when I was really at my lowest ebb, they really helped put me back on track, and they helped me find the right facility for me to go to. They physically took me there because both they and my psychiatrist were worried that I might do a runner. I knew I wouldn't do a runner. I don't think I had the guts to do that. But they really, you know, put it out there for me, and they continue to be hugely supportive of me and encouraging, and that's what you need. You need people around you who can just keep building you up and that you can talk to. And as I said, now I have no qualms in asking people for help. Absolutely not. And it really is hard, particularly for successful men, I think, to actually sit back and just say, you know what, I don't know the answer to this. I want help. And now when I talk to sort of young people going through these situations, or even as I talk to young people at the start of their career, and they say, what's the biggest piece of advice you could give me? And I now say, never be afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. It's really interesting. You started something on social media called #OnePageCoaching.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a little sort of, again, I'm doing so many little sort of pet projects. So I thought about one page coaching when I was sort of, again, going through this period of really not having anything. And I realized that one thing I didn't miss was my very extensive library of management books. And then I thought, why don't I miss those books? Well, it's probably because I've never read them. They're the sort of books that you buy because someone recommends them to you, and you might read the first chapter and you think, oh, I'll come back to that, and you go and read something more interesting. So I thought, actually, people like snackable contents. People like to be able to digest sound bites. Yeah. And maybe if I can distill some of my experience as a marketing professional and some of the coaching advice I've received and be able to write it freehand on one page of A4 and call it One Page Coaching and post it twice a week on LinkedIn, maybe it will help people. And I'm having really good fun doing it. And
it's brilliant. I pick up on it all the time. I'm always looking for your posts anyway, and it allows you to focus on the things that you're trying to say, but also gives you a chance to step back and think, oh, okay, yeah, I got that one.
Yeah, and if it's just really a nugget that helps somebody, then that's cool. And I like the sort of the mental exercise of thinking, how can I distill this down into as few words as possible and write it on a page of A4. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was listening to a podcast today by a lady called Elizabeth Days. How it's if you have a chance, do listen to it. She has a podcast called How to Fail.
Right.
And she was interviewing a chap called Mo Gaudat. Now he's from the Middle East, but he's made his name in the West in terms of he's written a book, and he was actually working for Google X for quite a while. His life changed when he lost his son at 21. Ali, he lost his son about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And, he's talking about incredible interview. But something that he mentioned today, I've made some notes here. I'm going to just read it. It's he said you have to take action, which is what you've done. And moving forward, you've got to embrace your emotion.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of get into that commitment of acceptance to give yourself that freedom to be able to then embrace that emotion. Say, and this idea that you've just mentioned that, I've got to stop vilifying myself and say, oh, poor me, why me? You've managed to get over that hurdle and actually come out and acknowledge it. You've taken responsibility. You've done the accountability piece, but now you've taken action, and that's the beauty of your story. It's fantastic.
What I take from what I've just heard you say there about sort of embracing emotion, it's all about connecting with your feelings. And again, that's something that men in particular and successful men in particular struggle with.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest questions I was asked in therapy was, how are you feeling? Yeah. And I realized I didn't really know.
Yeah.
And when you go on that exploration, which is now why I get so passionate about this direction that I want to take my career in, it's because I really feel it. It's on fire in here.
Yeah. I can see the passion. I can feel it from here.
Yeah. If you can connect your expertise and capability with this passion point, I think that is fantastic. Yeah. And it's taken me a 30-year career to get to this moment.
Well, sometimes, like I said, you have to go through various doors to understand what the purpose is in life. And
don't get me wrong, I've loved all of the jobs I've had all over the world, but this is something else.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned that I chased you for 4 years to meet up, if you remember, and I love the chase, so to speak. But
a lot of that chase is when I was not well. So
exactly, and I got it. I got that, and what's interesting, because I was listening to myself and my mind when I was preparing for this discussion, and also going back to when we met 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
The interesting thing was that I had a perception of you looking through social media lens. Here's a guy, and to be honest with you, 36 years ago was the last time we were together. We're two different people.
Yeah.
We're kind of rekindling that relationship. But so I'm looking through that lens, and I'm thinking, God, look at this guy. He's got it. He's done it. He's right up there. Never in a million years would I have thought when you sat down with me and a train hit me in that cafe when in the discussion that you had, and I thought, wow, what just happened here?
And I think again we're seeing it now with the coronavirus. It doesn't discriminate age, race, socioeconomic class, and exactly the same with mental ill health. It can hit anybody at any time. But mental health is something that we all have, and we must all look after our mental health as much as we look after our physical health. And just as if we neglect our physical health and we break an arm or we get ill and it's all very visible as a symptom, you get it fixed and people can see you've got a broken arm or whatever. Sadly, mental health, it's on the inside, and people can see that you might be miserable down in the dumps, but they can't actually see it because it's all inside and you've got to get it out.
You look and sound happier. You do. You sound excited.
I'm in a good place.
No, it's I can feel it.
Even with all the restrictions.
Yeah, and then this is the funny thing is that if I tell you about the legacy that the business left for me financially, and I'm still muddling through it. I'm happier now, Charles, than I was with what I had and all the pressures that came with it, and the unhappiness. It's the unhappiness that made me realize actually this is not worth it. And in a way today, if I look at where the entire world is financially, I was there 18 months ago. And so I've been working at that kind of, if you want to call it, stress level for that long, 24 months. So for me, the coronavirus has come in. Yes, you've got to stay at home. Okay, fine. That's what it requires. Fine. And we have to take responsibility for that, towards others. Sure. But it makes very little difference in terms of my stress levels because I was working at that level anyway. And it's about, I guess, the pressures that we go through to get the things that we want. We don't actually stop, and I'm talking about myself, don't actually stop and say, well, why do I need that? And why do I need this? And, and what are the ramifications if I do buy a very expensive car financially, And so it's really interesting. Listen, I'm grateful for the time that you've given. Is there anything that you want to say? I mean, aside from, as a message out to the listeners, because I'm going to share your details on the post anyway, so people can get in contact with you and have a discussion if there's anything that you've said. I'm sure there's so much you've said that others can relate to and benefit. But is there anything that you want to?
I guess one thing I would say as a sort of a model that again I was introduced to well into my career, and I wish I'd seen it earlier on. And I think it's relevant to everything that we've talked about. And actually, it was my first ever post on one-page coaching, which is a Venn diagram, just 3 circles. You can draw it on a piece of paper yourselves. One circle, you write in it what I'm good at. The other circle, you write in it what makes me money. And the other circle, you write in it what I love. And of course, the intersection is where you combine what you love with what you're good at, with what makes you money, and you become self-actualized. And for so long, I hadn't been pulling the lever of what I love enough. And I don't think they ever teach you at the business school or all these management courses that make sure you love it, make sure you're happy, make sure you're having fun, because this ain't a rehearsal.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was just thinking about one thing that came to mind when you were talking about that is you know, the word happiness bandied around quite a lot. And in what in our I guess in my upbringing, there's happiness and there's also contentment. To me,
Yeah,
they're two different things.
very different things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what does that what resonates with you for them when you listen to those two words?
Well, they are different, and I think, yeah, I had loads of contentment through a lot of things, either material or otherwise, that I achieved, but I hadn't really achieved that sort of level of happiness that, you know, I'm now on a path to achieve.
It's interesting because what I see and what I read is that contentment, and I've certainly found a certain level, not 100%. Contentment is a state of being. Whereas if you have a level of contentment, you can be happy, or you can be sad, or you could be angry, you could be annoyed, but those are emotions that go up and down while the base that contentment stays. And that's something that I've learned through my own experience, that you know, you contentment is the most important part of that emotion, that state of being. But listen, I'm really grateful to you, Charles. I was going to actually catch up with you physically, go out to dinner, and we were going to have that
side of this.
Yeah, yeah, and I wanted to also go and meet your parents. You know,
Yeah.
I wanted to catch up with them. So I think we will definitely put a date in the diary for that one.
Right,
but I'm grateful to you. And listen, mate, buddy, if you need anything from me, just give me a shout. I'm here.
I would love to help. Don't you worry.
All right. Okay, then. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot for your time.
All right.
Thanks.
'Cause you are the only